Hey, everybody. Today we have Ferd, the mobile home park lawyer, but he's more than just a lawyer. He's also an owner and operator, which I believe makes him very uniquely qualified to talk about a whole lot of very relevant things. And I'm really excited to have Ferd on here for one big reason, which we just talked about before I hit record, which is people ask me constantly, hey, man, can you send me a blank PSA or a lease or rules and regulations? And I always say, you really need to consult with your attorney. And because I've had that question so many times, in fact, I've had it a handful of times within literally the last week, I figured what better way than to bring someone on who can tell you why not to do that. So Ferd, I am really pumped to have you on here.
Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate it. Thanks for the intro and thanks for having me.
Yeah. So let's seriously just start there.
Well, I mean,
Yeah, go ahead.
lots of reasons, I guess. I mean, the first would be is, you didn't pay for it. But I mean, I get people asking this all the time, right? I mean, like, so you have your contract that you use, you paid for it at some point along the way. You paid an attorney. You have your lease, you paid for it. So sure, do you have the right of your benevolence to share it? Maybe. I mean, you'd be helping somebody out, but is your attorney gonna like that? Probably not. It's like for example, I have some documents that I sell, like template documents, and if I sold you my contract of deed, or if I sold you my financial pro forma, or my PPM set or something, I'll ask you not to share it. If you do, I'm not going to chase you. I don't know. For all I know, you sent it to 10 people. But so one, there's kind of, if someone asks you not to share it and you do, like now you're kind of breaking a commitment you already made. So one, that's probably not right. But two, just from a practical sense, is you would have potentially have some form of liability if you share that document because you're playing a lawyer or let's say you give your template contract and your template contract ends up being really bad. And I look at bad contracts all the time. And I've even got a few clients that are like big MHP operators and I'm embarrassed by some of their documents. And they're like, whoa, we need to look at this too. And change some things up. So let's say you forwarded one of those on and you forward it to John Smith and John Smith gets stung by it. Or is John Smith going to come back to you? Well, Ryan said this is a good contract. Now you have some liability, but then also the John Smith, why is he trusting Brian? We don't even know if Ryan paid an attorney. Maybe Ryan got it off LegalZoom. Maybe Ryan got it off Google, and it's a crappy form. So I don't know. There's lots of things you can be cheap on or chintzy on in life. Probably not a good idea to do it on, say, toilet paper, trash bags, and razor blades. But the other things are, I'm biased, obviously, as an attorney, right? But don't be cheap on legal. Don't be cheap on accounting because those things are a big deal and can be a big deal. So the other thing is, really just if you don't know if you didn't pay for something, is it good or not? Now, realistically, you probably have good form documents because you've been doing this for a while. You've probably hired legal counsel or some sort of CPA. So maybe your form is good and you could send it on. But I don't know why people, if you're going to be a real player in the space, it's really not that expensive to get a good operating agreement, a good contract, these sort of things. I mean, like I sell some of these templates for $500. So it's like, why would you go get one off the internet when you pay me $500 or pay Ryan $500 or something? So that's just a few things right off the bat of like why you should not do that. But I realize it happens all the time.
It definitely frustrates you more than it does me because for me, it's just like, okay, someone else I'm getting strung along with that liability, right? Like that could come back on me because I gave them a document, they used it and it failed, right? So that kind of irks me the wrong way, but this is what you do.
Yeah.
And you've seen so many contracts where you're like, what is this? And you bring up a really interesting point, which I actually hadn't considered, which is the ethical piece. In this day and age where you can just get music and stuff for free, I feel like our generation is really desensitized to just like free file sharing. And that's kind of permeated into this realm. But you do this for a living. Passing the bar is a big deal. And for you to spend all the time you do, I mean, because all my friends who are attorneys, by the way, they all tell me that people always go, hey, you're a lawyer. Can I get your opinion on something? And they're like, no, I'm not free.
Yeah, I give away tons of free advice. It is what it is. I mean, on the document piece, what's I don't say frustrating, but it's odd is like on my podcast, I give away lots of free documents, like letter of intent or due diligence checklists or some of these things, but those aren't really legal documents as much. Those are like strategic operational documents. But then, so I'll give somebody, hey, here's a free checklist for due diligence. Here's a free landline checklist. Here's a free, I don't know, 5 or 6 or 7 different things. And then that person will say, thanks, you're the best. Hey, could I also get your contract and your lease? And I'm just like, one guy in particular, I gave him a free 15-minute consultation, ended up being 45 minutes. I saved him, I thought of a better way to not have to go through quiet title and the Abandoned Housing Act for strategy. And he calls me back like, yeah, you saved me like $2,000. That was awesome. It's like, sweet. And then he asked for my documents and said, I'd like to get $500 for this. And he said, never mind. And I'm like, you literally just told me my free advice saved you $2,000 with a different attorney, and now you're gonna. So it's just like, it is what it is. But where the legal documents where I kind of have an out on that too is, I've got a malpractice provider. If I give you free documents and I'm not getting paid, I'm not really your lawyer. So my malpractice does not really apply. So I'm not going through my proper steps. So I should at least get $1 from you so that I'm covered and that you're covered in case I made a mistake. Mm-hmm. The free stuff, and that's more my problem than John Smith's problem, but it's another practical reality where lawyers really shouldn't give out specific legal advice or specific legal documents unless you have an engagement.
Another bit that I think is important to really drill in on, we recently, within the last couple months, had to go through the eviction courts, which are extra tricky right now because of all the moratoriums and the executive orders. But we paid up for an attorney to draft some awesome lease agreements. And when we showed up to court, so what ended up happening is my property manager usually can just show up to court, because a lot of times people don't even show up. So you win just the judgment just because they don't show up. She forgot to bring the lease with her, and she was this close to winning when the guy said, oh, well, have her show me the lease to prove it. She didn't have it. So they got a week stay, basically recess to come back. So that's another week's worth of time for this resident to go and craft an argument, this, that, and the other thing. She shows up with the document, and I instructed her to do this because I had another commitment, so I couldn't do it myself. I showed her where to point. There are 3 places on the contract that all she had to do is show up and point to it. The judge said, and I quote, "Can I get a copy of that?" We won it easily. And this is all because we paid up to have a very specific document drafted in a very specific county within a state. Because what I found, it being an owner in multiple states, is that each state, and really a lot of times each county, and even each judge can have a different interpretation. So just because, you operate in California doesn't mean me over here in North Carolina, I'm not going to be able to use your documents, or at least there's going to be a lot of vulnerabilities within it, because across states, there can be completely different laws.
That's a great point. I mean, evictions, that especially, and that's one thing I don't ever do is evictions because of that reason. I don't know the eviction specific rules in North Carolina, and it probably it's a one-off deal that you're not going to want to pay me to get smart on that. You're better off finding a guy that's already smart on that. So yeah, one thing that some of my clients do is they want me to do a state-specific lease, because a lease you're going to use 10 and 20 and hundreds of times over. It's like, for the most part, landlord-tenant law is the same nationwide, but each state has different rules. I mean, rules like Illinois, you have to have a 90-day rent notice. Okay, North Carolina has like a 30-day Abandoned Housing Act, but it starts after you get eviction. Other states, 15. Other states, no real state-specific rules, so it's just case by case. I've probably done like 15 state-specific leases in the last 4 months. So I'm seeing the differences where I don't operate in 15 states. I'm in like 5 or 6. So it's like, I didn't know North Carolina, but now I do. South Carolina, now I do, because somebody hired me to look at it. But that was prudent of them. But there are certain documents where you definitely need to have state-specific. And obviously at least look at things like abandoned housing. Can you build back water, sewer? What is the Dodd-Frank and SAFE Act provisions in that state? Are there any MH specific? Like some states have a mobile home park tenant bill of rights. Some have no real laws, other than just regular landlord tenant. But people, so that's why some people buy my template lease or hire me to do a lease. I'm like, look, this lease is for this state, or it's for no state. It's just generic and caveat emptor, so to speak. But I think you're doing it right to get state-specific documents, even at the granular level on eviction.
An interesting thing too is I've noticed, but county by county, things can be different as well. So for example, some counties allow you to not have to physically give out a 5-day or 10-day notice. you can actually on your lease initial, this counts as my 5-day or 10-day notice or whatever the state. Some judges hate that idea and will throw it out immediately.
Right.
So having that granular knowledge will help in a big way, because stuff happens. We had earlier this year, it was a really sad event. Someone from outside of the community who was dating a 17-year-old girl was one of our residents who liked the bad boys, right? And he shows up, and some guy, I guess, gave him a cross eye or something. And so this guy who I have never met before, didn't background check, he's freshly dating this girl, shows up to our property and I guess gets mean mugged by someone or something, or insert excuse to decide, hey, I'm going to shoot my gun at 2 mobile homes. So one was the guy that mean mugged him, and one was just a completely innocent victim. Now, thank goodness, no one got hurt, and we ended up in giving the 2 victims a free month of lot rent, and just reassured them, like, we're going to handle this. It turns out the guy had a warrant on his arrest, and we were integral in helping the police track this guy down. But at the same token, I also had to go and non-renew someone, which is not fun. And at first, this person was completely understandable. And then I guess what happened was they realized, like, hey, I've got nowhere else to go. So I'm going to fight this. And so now all of a sudden, my non-renewal is being contested. And when it's a tenant-owned home, it's not as easy as a park-owned home to get somebody out.
Well, non-renewal can get real messy on those, because I've heard lots of stories that used to, 6-7 years ago, I got started in this. That was like the business model. It's just non-renew, and you don't have to release, you don't have to go to eviction. It's like, but then judges started saying, this is so one-sided. It's not fair to like make this person leave. The judges are throwing it out. So it's like the month-to-month lease used to be the cat's meow, but now it's like, it's not even that valuable. You want to do 1-year lease? Some states require 2-year leases, et cetera. So how'd that work out? Are you still in the middle of that one?
So basically how this went is, as any operator knows, a lot of your residents, when they end up deciding that they want to shoot guns or do bad things, they also happen to have a law degree and know everything about the law. So this person went from, okay, I completely understand you want to keep your community safe. This person wasn't associated with me, but going from, hey, I'm the one who's responsible here, to complete 180, to now I'm going to fight you. This is illegal what you're doing, blah, 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 even though the general statute is available online and you can read all of it for free. And my non-renewal form has all of it right there. So you can go and read it. What I do is I'm a very face-to-face person. Ian and myself are. Ian actually met with this woman face-to-face. So it happened to fall on Ian's. Normally it's one of the 2 of us. So we actually got involved here because it was an extra, important message for us to send out to our residents, that we are not going to hide behind employees when it comes to people's safety like this. So Ian was the one who got to deliver this message. It's fun. I've had to do it myself in other instances, but basically when Ian showed up, and it was not just our employee saying it, with documentation and the eviction filing notice hit as well, basically she realized it's time to negotiate. And we ended up buying her home from her at a fair price, getting the title. And now that home is ours, and we're going to eventually sell it because we've got our dealer license and all that jazz. But the ultimate point I wanted to argue here is that there's a kind of a corollary to what you were saying is, if you have good documents, when bad things inevitably happen that are completely out of anybody's control, even this woman's control. Like if you have kids, your child is not controllable. That is just how kids work, especially teenagers. Bad things are going to happen. If you got to lay down the law, you got to better make sure you know the law and you have your ducks in the row. So if this woman was to contest, you're ready to fight for the safety of those residents. Because I guarantee you, if that guy hadn't have been caught, he would have been back hanging out with that girl. It would have happened.
Got it. Well, good. Glad it worked out.
I want to pivot for a minute.
Okay.
Because I can hear the cringing of my fellow folks who started with nothing. So Ian and I, 6 years ago, almost started with effectively no money. Myself, I had a negative net worth. Flash forward, we've bought 17 mobile home parks and growing. For right now, if I need to go and spend money to get a new contract, it's not a big deal. 6 years ago, I had basically no money at all to spend. What would you say to someone who goes, yeah, this is great, but I don't have any money, so why don't I just borrow someone's until I have a couple mobile home parks and I'm cash flow positive, and now I can pony up to get all these contracts and whatnot.
Are you talking about borrowing money for legal service or borrow money for your first deal?
For legal services specifically.
Okay.
So in other words, if I'm someone who's starting with nothing and I'm like, man, I don't even have enough money for my first down payment for a mobile home
Yeah.
park,
Well,
like,
I think if you have no money for, you can get a contract for $500 or $1,000. If you have no money for that, you have no money for the deal. So the way that you got to get this done, I think, is you go find the deal and tie it up. I've got a letter of intent that's basically a contract. It's binding, which is unique, and I've closed deals on literally just that letter of intent, and I give it away for free. So tell that person, hey, go ask for the letter of intent, or I'll send it to you. You can send it to them, and that'll tie the property up. And then let's say you go find a deal it's worth $1 million. You tie it up for 800. You've got equity, right? You can then go raise money on that deal and bring on other partners that have money to help you close the deal. And then you just put the legal fees, it's just part of the deal, like your appraisal, phase one, your survey, your other camera inspections. It's part of the deal. It's part of the project cost. Now, if you don't have the money for a contract, you probably don't have money to fund all those pursuit costs either. You're going to have to find your business partner early on in your due diligence process. Otherwise, you're not going to effectively go through due diligence. I mean, if you've got $0, it's tough to get going. You better off probably assigning the first deal or raising money. If you got 5,000-10,000, that's enough to, in most cases, put down earnest money and get the necessary reports going to then prove you got a decent deal, to find somebody else that's really the financial backer. So I mean, yeah, my first deal I put $0 down on. I bought a 54 park. It appraised like $850, and I bought it at $695. Bank gave me 100% loan. It was recourse, but I'm like, that was 2014. They're hard to get those loans now, but you ask enough banks, maybe you can do it. No, and I mean, yeah, I had like, I don't even remember. I think I spent 90 grand and did like 15 park home remodels of that. And obviously 90 into 15 didn't work that well. So it was about 18,000 a pop. I did 4 or 5. And I sold one, I did the next one. I sold one to the next one. And pretty soon, I just took me 3.5 years to recycle that money and do that. But I was able to, turn 90. I made $400,000 in that deal in 3.5 years. Now, if I had 0, I'd had to go find somebody else that had the money, and then I'd had to chop my fee, right, or chop my piece of the deal. But part of the reason I was able to make it pencil was the real estate loan took 0 down, because I hadn't found a deal, and the bank took care of the rest. But that's harder to do. But anyway, that would be my advice: is if you don't have any money, you find somebody that does.
I love that you said that, because that's effectively the exact playbook that Ian and I took starting out, which was step 1 before we even really start cold calling is we find who we're the people we're going to partner with, because we have no money. So I have no choice but to use OPM. Right.
Right.
So what does that mean? Yeah. You don't need leases to get a deal under contract. That makes sense. However, what do you do for operating agreements? Well, what Ian and I did was we actually leaned on our investor partners who were experienced in this space to get us an operating agreement. And for a couple $100, we had our own attorney go over it. And he found some areas of liability, vulnerability within that we kind of pushed back on a little bit. And then it wound up being a happy ending. So in other words, even if you have no money, if you're truly starting with effectively nothing, you can still find ways to do things the right way for just a couple $100, especially if you're willing to partner with someone out of the gate. So my next question to you then is with regards to operating agreements, because I get that question as well. Like, why don't I just copy yours or someone else's for an operating agreement? And what I always say is, when you get in a car, you put on your seatbelt, not because you are intending to go to a demolition derby and to get into an accident, but because there's other idiots on the road and there are other things that are completely out of your control. And the thing about a seatbelt is, yeah, it's annoying, but oh my gosh, you are glad it was there when you needed it. So operating agreements to me are huge portions of this. What risks does someone have entering an agreement without one? Because what I hear every now and again, Ferd, is, oh, I've known such and such for decades. He's a really close friend. Or, oh, this is my dad or my cousin. What types of risks are there if you are either just borrowing someone else's, copying and pasting, or you're just like, no, this is my husband, wife, cousin, best friend, whatever?
Well, I mean, lots of risk. I mean, you really don't need an operating agreement until you've got a problem, right? As you said, your seatbelt example. So if it's a single member LLC, it's just you really don't need one. You can write it on a napkin. I'm Ferd. I'm the manager. I'm the only member. I own 100% of the deal. I can make all the decisions I want. Ferd. 10 years ago, probably 13 years ago, when I started real estate, they banks didn't require operating agreements. Apparently, I didn't even have one first. I didn't know what I was doing. Nowadays, you can't get a checking account without an operating agreement. You can't close on a real estate at a title company without an operating agreement because they want to make sure that Ferd's the manager. So if you're looking for a single member deal, go pull one off the internet. I don't care, right? Because there's no real risk. If you got two people, if you're married, you're one person from a tax perspective. You're a disregarded entity. But if you're two people, it's Ryan and Ferd in a deal. We need to have an operating agreement that we understand, and we need to have one that's got legitimate provisions on, when we make capital contributions, when we get capital distributions, what's the voting rights, what are the compensation rights, who's the tax matters partner, and a hundred other things, including capital calls and liability and risk and blah blah blah. I mean, it goes from being 2 pages to 25 pages in a second, and that's just your standard operating agreement. So what could go wrong? I mean, I used to be in business with a guy that was not a good guy to be in business with, but his operating agreement had personal recourse. It was a limited liability company. It was supposed to be limited liability. He wanted personal recourse within the partners. So if the deal went south, let's say it was $1 million deal, and the deal went south, the bank would only be able to, the bank or the other, say there's a lawsuit and somebody tried to sue, they wouldn't be able to sue me personally and get my house or my car. They could just get whatever that LLC owned, which was this one property. But let's say that as a result of that, the suit took down the property and there was still a bank loan. The bank had personal recourse to me and the other guy. The other guy was 10 times wealthier than me, 50 times wealthier than me. And as a result, the bank was going to pursue him. So he wanted to make sure that if the deal went south, that he would be able to personally come after me for recourse, irrespective of the limited liability company. So unusual, right? But that was in that operating agreement. I read that and I didn't like that provision, right? So I would try to negotiate away from it, or I would put in what I actually ended up doing is I put in my ownership in this deal was I put it in an LLC. So the member of the partnership was a different LLC. That member had personal recourse to this guy, and he wasn't sharp enough to figure out that I was hiding behind an LLC. Now the bank knows my LLC has no money. It's a brand new LLC. The bank made me have signed personal recourse, which is fair. I had personal recourse to the lender, but not to the partner. So it was a risk mitigation technique. I read the operating agreement. That was a unique provision I'd never seen in an operating agreement before. We were using his template because he was the boss, right? So he used his template. So it's important to know what's in there. I joke like, I have life insurance and I didn't die yesterday, so I wasted the premium, right? But I have life insurance in case I die today. Well, your operating agreement is kind of like that. It's like, I want to know what's in there. I want to understand it. I want to negotiate it. And there's lots of different provisions that are going to be complex, especially as you get into more complex deals like syndications and stuff like that, where there are typically two different classes of investors or members. So the operating agreement is the complex piece. Getting the articles of organization, getting the certificate of organization, getting the EIN. Those are simple. My secretary does all those. That's not legal work. That's like filling out paperwork in the government. The operating agreement is considerably more complicated.
I agree. There is also nothing like having pen to paper. So with, especially with things like rent raises, like we do our rent raises once a year in February. So we handed out all of our notices this year. And wouldn't you know, a couple folks that we negotiated rent locks for, they hadn't realized that their rent locks had expired, and they showed up all heaping hot and mad. And we showed up, and all my employees had to do is pull out their contract with the initials right by, your rent lock expires on X date, and they point to it and they see their initials right there and they go, oh, okay.
Yeah.
There's nothing like having pen to paper. So when things go south, you can go, well, remember we agreed to this, and there's your wet ink right next to your initials or signature at the bottom of the page. that's what we agreed upon.
No, I mean, it's great. I take lots of notes, and I told people I still have archived like literally every meeting I've ever been in since 2007 in chronological order within the folder, and alphabetical order within the box. And I say, I got a really good memory, but not as good as my notes. And I can go pull. I was in this meeting on this project, and I put initials. That's what RN. He said that. Okay, that was you. You know, and so having your own notes is good, but when it comes to dealing with other people, having things in writing, it's imperative. You know, so I don't hear many people nowadays saying, oh, I don't even need an operating agreement. I hear people not reading their operating agreement and just not understanding it. That happens all the time. But not even having one, that's craziness.
Yeah, I agree. Some of these operating agreements are like 40 pages long, and you're reading through it and you're like, come on, some of this stuff is never going to happen. I mean, it's nice that it's there, but realistically speaking, having something you don't really understand a lot of times is better than just having straight absolutely nothing. I want to take a bit of a pivot here, and then I want to finish off with a LinkedIn post you had recently about exiting a toxic relationship. But before we do that, earlier this last year, 2020, we had an interesting park that we put under contract. We ended up backing out of because our legal counsel basically said, because of the rules, regulations, laws within that particular county, even if you win in court, they're going to change the rules, sue you again, and they're going to eventually outspend you and win. So our legal advice was, don't walk, run. You don't want to touch this opportunity with a 10-foot pole. And it turns out in due diligence, we found out that they had recently been under contract, and probably for the exact same reason the other group eventually backed out. So my question to you here is, what types of battles with cities, municipalities, counties, etc., are winnable? And which battles are like, dude, you really don't want to touch that with a 10-foot pole?
Okay. Good question. I mean, obviously, it depends is kind of the generic legal answer. It depends on the facts, right? But typically, you're dealing with zoning issues and permitting issues. And in mobile home parks, it's probably the most complicated zoning law. If I was in the other office out here, I'd show you my book my old mentor wrote, Mike White, called Missouri Land Use Law, Missouri Economic Development Law. It's like 3,700 pages. To practice law for like 60 years. So he was my mentor, right? So he's forgotten more about the law than I'll ever know. But I learned from him about property rights. And if somebody has a taking, like through eminent domain or condemnation, there's a taking, the government's supposed to pay you and pay you a just, reasonable fee. People can do a partial taking by limiting your property rights for use. And grandfathering is a protected right. It's back in the Constitution. And then if somebody takes your property, it's a form of discrimination. You can sue the city and pursue, I want to say it's Title 43 United States Civil Rights Act. You can pursue legal fees, which basically means you can tell the city, hey, we're going to sue you. And when we win, you're also going to pay my law firm. And my old law firm won several six-figure legal fee judgments against us for doing this stuff. So there's always that threat if you bring that to the city's attention. But my property rights and grandfathering and zoning, I typically fight all the time. Most people get a certificate of zoning, which is basically the city saying, hey, here's my zoning. You know, it's this. I'm under contract with the park right now in St. Louis, and I got the city certificate of zoning. And I said, nice try, basically. I said, yeah, you've mentioned my current zoning, but the current zoning is actually legal conforming because you, the city, zoned me MH because you came into existence after my park. But my park predates you, the city, predates the code, therefore I'm exempt from your regulations, with the very limited exceptions under the police power of the United States Constitution to police the public health, safety, and welfare of the public. So fire code, for example, they can say, if my old park the homes were 2 feet apart, they can say current fire code says it needs to be 10, and it's for safety. I can't say, no, I'm always 2. They can't do that to me. But what I can do, they're allowed to give me the 10 restriction because of safety. But at the same time, this park has homes that are like 12 feet off the road. It's like a busy road. Current setbacks say I need to be 30 feet off. So I go to the city and I say, look, that's wrong. The 30 feet does not apply to me. I got 3 vacant lots here. I want to fill them. And I'm exempt and immune from the design, they call them design standards, because those design standards came into existence after me. And general grandfathering says you can't impose those upon me unless I am guilty of abandonment of my use or I'm a nuisance. And they came around, right? So the way that I say to the city is, look, I'm not going to just accept what you've told me my zoning is. I'm going to research the city code. I'm going to draft a zoning letter that's a negotiated certificate of zoning, and I'm going to get you to sign it. And if you don't, I might threaten to sue. I might sue, which is a bluff in most every instance. So ultimately, you have to decide what's the pain. Like I had a client here in Missouri, and I'm licensed in Missouri. I know the law pretty well. He was fighting over 2 lots. I said, hey man, I'm right. You'll win, but it's going to cost you $25,000 to see if I'm to prove it. Maybe 50. He's like, and this is in a small town. The lot rent was like $120. So he's like, it's not worth it. So I get it. I recommend it's not worth it. Other times, like I'm looking at another case right now in Indiana where this person has fought it not once. Sometimes you just ask, you want to go through what's called exhausting your administrative remedies. And you first try to talk to the planning department yourself or negotiate with them. Eventually you fill out a formal application for a variance with the Board of Zoning Adjustment. If they tell you no, well, now you can sue, you can go to circuit court, which you don't really want to do. But you got to give it until you know formally. I'll have a city manager or city attorney say, we're not doing that. I'll say, okay, I'm going to file for a variance and make you tell me no and exhaust my administrative remedies. And they're like, oh, okay. Ultimately, the tactic that I use is I try to get to the bottom of the city and say, what is your goal here? Is your goal that you hate trailer parks and you want to get rid of them? Because if so, we're going to have a fight. If your goal is you don't want to have every trailer park and more trailer parks and expand and all that kind of stuff, okay, here's what we can do. You can grant me an exception for this reason. And I'll agree to this limitation. Say I can't bring any homes older than 1990, something like that. Or I'll agree to, absorb 10-foot setbacks or something else. And if the city has that goal of increasing the quality of this park and affordable housing, then you can oftentimes get to the end resolution that you wanted without having to get hostile. So ultimately, it's a cost benefit analysis from a cost, if you potentially can increase the valuation by 100,000 and it's going to cost you, or by $1 million, and it's going to cost you 50,000 to fight it, that's 20 to 1 payoff. If you got a 45% chance of accomplishing it, the math says you should do it. But easy for me to say, right? It's the other guy's money. So ultimately, I think you should try to have a good relationship with the city. Try not to threaten too much, but at some point, I'll drop words like, "Look, I'm not looking to sue you guys," and I don't even tell them. I don't even tell them I'm a lawyer. I'm buying. Hey, I'm under contract with this park. And my understanding of grandfathering is this, and 50% of the time, the person in the planning department has no idea. But I can convince them in 20 minutes that I know their job better than they know their job. And then they don't want to comment, hey man, I'm not looking to fight you and I don't want to embarrass anybody, or I don't want to get, I'm not looking to get a lawsuit going. But I mean, this is the law. And if it's some states that have case law, like the St. Louis deal, Missouri it's in the Eastern District, there's a case that's on point. I'm like, look, here's the case, read it. That's actually the law, elaborated. I just bought a park in Des Moines. There's case law, Supreme Court, and they changed the legislature. They changed the statute. I'm like, look, guys, that little town in Des Moines is disagreeing. So now I got to go through this stupid variance process. If they tell me yes, I give what I want. If they tell me no, I'll file a lawsuit. Then they'll give me what I want because the law is clear. So it's really it depends. Depends on the math. Depends on your appetite for risk. Nobody wants to go to litigation. I don't do litigation. It drives me nuts. Nobody wins with the attorneys for the most part, but sometimes it makes sense to do it or threaten to do it, and just continually look at each deal on case by case.
In MBA school, we always joke that if you don't know the answer, you always say it depends. So it sounds like law school too.
That's it's worse in law school. It's worse.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
I joke. That's part of the reason I got a degree in accounting and then I got a law degree because I was tired of it. Like, I don't know, ask an accountant. I don't know, ask a lawyer. I'm like, what is with these accountants and lawyers that supposedly are so wise? Like, let me just go learn what they learn what they know. And it's still lawyers now all say it depends, but it's largely true. But it's frustrating as a client to hear that. And I've hired lawyers on other projects and stuff, so I get it. Like, no, I don't want you to give me some theoretical discussion. I need you to take a position as an advocate and go back it up.
We've over the years, we have been sued. We have had to sue. It is expensive. With the general rule of thumb that kind of our legal advice said is, man, you don't want to sue. Here's why: it's like 20 grand every turn of a paper. Any motion, any dismissal, it's going to cost you. And even if you win, to your point, and the county, municipality, whatever, whomever is suing you ends up paying your legal fees, they're not paying your retainer up front. You are.
All
And
right.
that money you're not touching for, in some case, years if they really drag it out. Or as we're seeing with COVID, a lot of courts have been closed for an extended period of time. So there's one deal we're under contract on right now where we're waiting on basically the entity to sue itself. And it's a whole hot mess we could talk about hopefully after we close. But the thing of it is, COVID slowed it down. I mean, stuff like that happens. And look, I think you'll agree with me on this bit, which is, and anybody who's listening who's never been sued, it's part of the business. If you run a business in the United States of America, at some point you're getting sued. It's an inevitability. And even if you win, even if you know you're going to win, even if they're saber rattling, like my friend Ryan Smith likes to say, even if they're just threatening a lawsuit, it's stressful. It is stressful, period. You win, it's stressful. You lose, it's even more stressful. And you just want to avoid it at all costs if possible. But then again, sometimes you don't have an option. Literally yesterday, I was on the phone with a county that we have a very heavy presence in, with the people who approve, so with zoning and with one of the city managers people, and they not directly but effectively directly said, we want more luxury apartments, luxury, just high-end commercial stuff in this county. Yeah, affordable housing is great. They said that almost verbatim, by the way. Yeah, affordable housing is great to have, and yeah, there's a shortage of it, but we want more luxury stuff. This is how a lot of counties think. And because of that, literally last year, we had to go to one county city hall to pull up old documents to prove we were grandfathered for certain things. We have had to go to counties to pull easement records and stuff like that. I want to just echo what you just said right there, which is, during due diligence, there is just nothing like advocating for yourself and going and doing that research for yourself. Even if you have to go spend a couple bucks in person, even in the middle of COVID, bring your mask and go and pull physical records. And a lot of times the municipality didn't even exist. And there's, like you said, stuff that was there from decades ago that you can fight and eventually win, because, as we love to joke, a lot of government people don't really like their jobs and want to whack you with a power stick. So coming in and knowing their job better than they do, a lot of times gets them to just back off. So I love hearing all of that. Let us do this, because we're a little short on time. You had a post recently that really grabbed my attention and really hit me hard. And it was that you exited a toxic relationship about a year ago. And I've had plenty of friends, myself included, have been in toxic relationships. Now, I've been one I can't stand stuff for very long. So I find myself getting out of them quick. So I know how it feels, but I also have people very close to me who just don't want to admit they're in a toxic relationship. Without going into too much detail, how does a toxic relationship really affect your happiness, even if you're kicking butt? Because it sounds like you were crushing it in every sense of the word, with exception to this toxic relationship.
I mean, as you know, I mean, a toxic relationship clouds everything, right? I mean, I left a lot of money on the table for business partner. I'm like, you know what? It's not worth it. It's just like every inch of it's like when you fight for everything. You don't want to be in business with people you can't trust, and that's what I realized I was in. It's like, oh no, and I was like, you get a little money, you get a little valuation on something, like, man, you see your net worth going up or the potential for it to go up by a bunch. You're like, I can suck it up for a little bit longer. I can plan my exit later. And pretty soon it's like, what years you keep getting in more and more. I'm like, man, this is just crazy. So anyway, I decided I'm out, and left a lot of money on the table to do that, but it was the best thing that happened to me. So it's just, it's too easy. I don't know. It's too easy to make money and too easy to find good friendships, good relationships, that you shouldn't have to stick into a bad deal with a bad person to try to do those sort of things. So, yeah, I mean, I just think it's imperative to, right now it's like I've got friends I work with, family I work with, and people I like and trust. And man, this is so much better than, you know, trying to chase bigger, greener pastures, you know, for money or for glory or something else. Like, man, happiness is crucial to everything, health and everything. So, yeah, I just think if you're in a bad relationship with a business partner, man, find a way to get out any way you can. And it's been huge for me.
I really want to highlight, underline, bold, italicize something you just said, which is, well, why can't you just suck it up and deal with it? I can't tell you how many times I have heard that from people, even myself. I had a job back in corporate America that paid well, that the responsibilities were not huge. I don't want to say I was doing nothing, but at times it felt like I was doing nothing. And it just, I was surrounded by toxic people and it was driving me nuts. And my own wife said, so what? Just deal with it, right? That wore on me big time, and it clearly wore on you big time. And I really want to take a second to drill down in on this for anyone who's like, oh yeah, whatever, just I can deal with it. Ferd, tell us why eventually you will crack, because money, it just does not buy happiness.
Yeah, I mean that's great. That's what it is. It's money not my happiness, but also just it impacts everything else in your life. I mean, my wife was luckily me, I guess, was the opposite. She's like, you need to quit, you need to quit. And I'm like, no. Here's this money. And I look at my commission sheet or look at my deal sheet going through. Like, man, just give me this. It's like, you know what? Who cares? You know, and she's like, I'd rather you go. I don't know the example she gave me. She was a teacher back before she was a stay-at-home mom. She's like, go be a teacher. We'll buy a smaller house. We'll do this. We'll do this. I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. I have this ambition. So it's just getting out of a bad relationship, man, was just awesome.
My wife, I can tell you, can hear me from the other room, and she's going to be like, I can't believe you said that. So to be fair, I should defend her and say that shortly thereafter, she did realize that the same thing, which is what we just said, is that it doesn't matter how much money you have. I know multi-millionaires who tell me they would trade every penny for it for a relationship with their son. And
this guy I worked with, man, his son quit. His son worked for us. His son walked out and he said something along the effect of, my son doesn't deserve to effing live. He's a disappointment. And like, because he doesn't have the ambition to make as much money as me. It's like, what? And he left. I mean, in a 10-year business partners left. People left in droves. But it's like, yeah, he doesn't get to see his grandkids. He's precluded from seeing his grandkids. It's like, money is your God. If money is your God, that's all you're going to have.
Yeah.
And it's not the right God.
It's just not. And my wife has had some wonderful relationships in her life and had never quite really been in that situation before. So as she saw me going through that now in retrospect, she's like, oh yeah, I would never say something like that. Get stuff in writing, y'all. I remember her saying that, but yeah, Ferd, you'll agree with me here. There's nothing like a child, your child specifically, to bring you a level of joy that I've just never experienced anywhere else. When I'm having a bad day and I go and see my son and he hits me with that smile and says, Dad, it's over. I melt. Nothing else in the world matters. And to pick money over that, especially when eventually you have grandkids, I just can't relate to that. But on a more practical note, I know a lot of folks that I'm close with know that they're in a toxic relationship, but feel like they're stuck for X, Y, or Z reason. Just to pull, for example, not to call anyone out specifically, but just for example, oh, I'm married and I don't have a prenup, so a divorce would basically ruin everybody involved. So I'm not going to leave. I'll just suck it up and deal with it. Or again, the thing that spawned me wanting to ask you this was, oh, I just have too much money tied up in here and it's just not quite time to sell out yet, or I don't want to rock the boat or this, that, and the other. So I'll just deal with it. Tell me, if you would, it's not easy to exit a relationship, period. Why is it that it's worth the pain?
I don't know, it's that sense of freedom, so to speak. It just, it just takes the pressure off. So, I mean, it's the pain of being in a bad relationship. It's not going to, I say business relationship because, I'm not a big fan of divorce. being Catholic, and my wife and I don't plan to ever get divorced, but knock on wood, no. But being in a business bad relationship, it's just like every day it gets a little worse. It accumulates. Yeah. If you think it's going to change, you're a fool. I feel like you should, they like kind of like with employees, hire slow, fire fast. I feel like you enter a new partnership. If you figure out at the beginning, I knew right away, and I should have done. The guy gave me $100,000 signing bonus and a big piece of a bunch of retail real estate deals. And I was just like, man, this is great. And then I knew a month in, I was like, what am I doing here with this guy? And I'd already taken that money and bought him a loan park with it and stuff. So now I didn't have that money liquid. So it wasn't as simple as just giving his money back and go away. I was just like, oh man, this is going to be a problem. So I think just the freedom of, being unchained.
I am sure you've seen this movie, and I'm going to make a reference to it, and you might get a little chuckle when I say this, but Tom Cruise, 1993, The Firm.
Oh yeah.
That kind of reminds me of that, where just everything seems great. It's family organization. They give him a Mercedes, a big fat bonus. He's making all this money when a couple months prior he's just eating Chinese food and he's miserable. And then it gets worse from there. And obviously it's Hollywood. It gets crazy, but that's a really, really great movie for anyone who enjoys watching movies, to see what it's like to really, truly work with something toxic. And it takes it to the next level, obviously, because it's Hollywood. But funny that you say you're Catholic, so am I. So I definitely want to echo those sentiments there too. And kind of where I want to end this today, obviously, if you're in a toxic relationship or just a toxic situation in general, you got to find your way out. It's worth it. What are red flags that you can see on the front end? So for those from a more practical standpoint who aren't in a toxic relationship. So for example, my wife, what if go back a couple of years when I was in that corporate situation, what red flags could maybe she have seen or I have seen prior to taking that job or going into a business partnership? What types of things can you kind of vet for, question for, qualify for, look for to avoid a bad situation, maybe with a business partnership or just anything in general?
Yeah. Well, I mean, kind of like when you're buying a little home park, right? You do your due diligence. So due diligence, you research the person. You can ask for people that know them. You can ask for referrals. Sometimes when I vet park managers, I see how they treat other people, like their tenant. Like I bought a park here in Kansas City, and then I was debating keeping the manager on, which I almost never do. And I was meeting with her, and some residents came in, and they wanted to interrupt her. And these residents spoke minimal English. And this manager's like, hey, English only. I'm not speaking Spanish. And hey, I'm in the kitchen in a meeting with somebody important. And it was just like really short and really rude to him. And I was like, no, it's okay. You can deal with this real quick. And she's like, no, come back later. And I was just like, man, this person's bedside manner is really bad. So you can do that with a business partner by seeing how they treat their secretary or their receptionist, or sometimes in corporate America, they take you to lunch and they'll pay the waiter or waitress to spill your drink on you or mess up your order, to see if you're the kind of person that says, oh, no big deal, or the person that says, man, can you believe that stupid person? That's why they only make minimum wage, and those are often set up, but you can learn a decent amount about something from that. And like I have a client who at one point asked me to partner on a deal, and I said no, and I said, oh no, I'm fine, I'm busy on other stuff right now. But the other reason I said no is I saw the way they were treating other personnel, managers, surveyor, engineer, bankers, and like trying to, cut a deal with the surveyor. Hey, it's $8,000 and then retrade the price. I'm like, what are you gonna do that? What are you gonna do with me? I've already seen you acting like this sort of people. Kind of like that operating agreement that I mentioned earlier, where there was a unique, painful provision in there, which I knew was creatively added from experience. So I'm like, okay, this person's already shown a willingness to go sue their business partners. Probably want to think twice. So easier said than done, frankly. But there are definitely things you can do as part of your due diligence.
I really like hearing that, because you will be on the receiving end of that one day. That's how it is. If somebody complains about other people frequently in front of you, they're complaining about you behind your back. If they're bragging to you that they sue all these people, they're going to sue you one day. If they brag about how they retraded X, Y, or Z, they're probably going to do that to you one day. It's just how people are. And to your point, you got to do your due diligence. And I also love the point that you said about firing fast, because Ian and I were both on site with a property manager who, her cousin shows up, and I don't care what your culture is. Like, I know they say Italians like to move their hands fast and talk really loudly or whatever. I don't care what your culture is. If you behave completely inappropriately, even as if it's your cousin, in front of your boss, in front of other residents, that's not who you want representing you, period. And so we had to fire that person, which was, firing is never fun. So I had the fun task of doing that about a year and change ago, but it all comes back to exactly what you said earlier, which is typically you don't want to keep the people that are already there. It's just a part of it. I mean, I'm not saying they don't deserve a chance, but they will behave to you like they will behave to those around them. So I love hearing that. Ferd, we're at about time here. I want to really thank you for taking the time. Folks, I want to reiterate, do not cheap out on your attorney and find a way out of toxic relationships. Otherwise, Ferd, I really want to thank you for taking the time. It was an awesome episode.
You got it. Thanks, Ryan. Thanks for having me.